While the world watches the major conflicts unfolding in places like Ukraine and Gaza, a different kind of war rages on, far from the glare of the 24-hour news cycle. More than 20 million people are currently trapped in brutal conflicts you have likely never heard of. These are the forgotten wars, the shadow struggles fought in remote corners of the globe. They are waged in the dense jungles of Myanmar, across the arid plains of the Sahel, and in the resource-rich provinces of Central Africa. These are not small, insignificant skirmishes. They are devastating confrontations quietly but decisively reshaping our collective future, influencing everything from the price of food at your local market to the next wave of global migration. The headlines are dominated by a few select crises, creating an illusion of focused chaos. Yet, in September 2025, as global attention was fixed elsewhere, the Al-Qaeda-linked group JNIM began imposing a crippling economic blockade on Mali's capital, Bamako. They attacked hundreds of fuel tankers, starving the city of energy, forcing Western embassies to evacuate their staff. This was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, invisible tapestry of conflict. These hidden wars decide who controls the flow of vital resources like gold, oil, and rare earth minerals. They determine which nations rise as regional superpowers, and which ones collapse into failed states, creating vacuums filled by extremist groups and foreign mercenaries. Why don't we hear about these wars? The reasons are complex and deeply unsettling. Mainstream media often lacks the resources or the incentive to cover protracted, low-intensity conflicts in regions deemed less strategically important to Western interests. Furthermore, the belligerents themselves often prefer to operate in the shadows, using proxies and plausible deniability to avoid international scrutiny. Governments engaged in these conflicts frequently restrict access for journalists and aid workers, creating information blackouts that conceal mass atrocities and humanitarian disasters. The result is a dangerous blind spot in our global awareness, a silent erosion of stability that goes unnoticed until it is too late. The terrifying reality is that these conflicts are not contained. Their shockwaves ripple outwards, destabilizing entire regions and challenging the foundations of international law. They create massive refugee crises that spill across borders, straining the resources of neighboring countries and fueling political tensions thousands of miles away. They disrupt global supply chains, leading to shortages and price hikes that affect consumers everywhere. These are the secret wars reshaping your world, and their consequences are already arriving at your doorstep. The critical question we must ask is, why should you care now, before one of these hidden wars reaches you? What defines a hidden war? It is a conflict characterized by its deliberate obscurity. Unlike conventional wars fought between nation-states, with formal declarations and clear front lines, these struggles are often ambiguous and multifaceted. They are frequently fought by non-state actors, local militias, rebel factions, jihadist insurgents. These groups are rarely acting alone. Behind them, you will often find the guiding hand of regional or global powers. These larger nations fight their battles indirectly, providing weapons, funding, intelligence. This allows them to pursue their strategic interests, controlling a vital trade route, weakening a rival, without committing their own troops and risking a direct confrontation. A classic example is unfolding in eastern DRC. The M23 rebels have seized vast, mineral-rich territories, widely seen as a proxy for neighboring Rwanda. While Rwanda officially denies involvement, the proxy arrangement allows influence and resource exploitation. This model of warfare is becoming increasingly common. It lets powerful states wage war by remote control, creating chaos and redrawing borders with minimal political cost. The primary victims are civilians caught in the middle, their lives shattered by a war they cannot see, and whose architects remain anonymous. Resource control is another critical element. Many wars are fought over the world's most valuable commodities. In Sudan, rival military factions fight over lucrative gold mines. The rapid support forces, enriched by gold trafficking, use wealth to purchase weapons and hire foreign mercenaries, perpetuating a cycle of violence and humanitarian collapse. This pattern repeats across the globe. Oil fields, diamond mines, coltan deposits become the primary drivers of war. The human cost is staggering and largely uncounted. In the Central African Republic, clashes have displaced tens of thousands, forcing people into overcrowded hospitals and churches with dwindling supplies. In Myanmar, the junta's war against ethnic armed groups and pro-democracy fighters has produced horrific abuses against minority populations. These are not just statistics, they are silent humanitarian disasters. Across the vast, sun-scorched expanse of the Sahel, a quiet catastrophe is unfolding. This semi-arid belt stretching across Africa, just south of the Sahara Desert, has become the epicenter of the world's fastest-growing and most neglected crisis. A wave of military coups has toppled fragile democracies in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They are interconnected fronts in a single, sprawling, hidden war. A war that is steadily erasing borders, displacing millions, and creating a new haven for international terrorism right on Europe's doorstep. The primary actor is Jama'at Nusrat al-Islam wal Muslimin, JNIM. JNIM and its rival, the Islamic State Sahel province, have carved out vast fiefdoms. In Burkina Faso, the government now controls less than half of the country's territory. In Niger, large swathes of the countryside are under de facto insurgent rule. This collapse of state authority is not a distant problem. It directly threatens regional stability and global security, a domino effect of failing states. This is a war fought not on conventional battlefields, but in the spaces where the state has retreated. They attack military outposts, blow up bridges, and terrorize local communities. This strategy of attrition slowly bleeds the state dry, forcing soldiers and administrators to withdraw into fortified urban centers. The result is a patchwork of territories where state law has vanished, replaced by the brutal edicts of extremist groups who impose their will through fear. The international response has been fractured and ineffective. The withdrawal of French forces and other Western forces has left a security vacuum. New players have filled that vacuum. Russia's Wagner Group, now rebranded, has stepped in to prop up juntas in exchange for access to mineral resources, adding another layer of proxy conflict. This geopolitical maneuvering does little to protect civilians. Instead, it transforms the Sahel into a chessboard for foreign powers, while the people caught in the middle suffer the consequences of a war the world has chosen to ignore. The strategy of these jihadist groups has evolved from simple hit-and-run attacks to something far more sinister: economic warfare. They are weaponizing hunger and thirst. By controlling key transit routes, the insurgents can choke off entire cities, creating sieges that are invisible to the outside world. The blockade of Mali's capital, Bamako, which began in September 2025, is a terrifying blueprint for this new form of conflict. JNM systematically targeted and destroyed hundreds of fuel tankers on the roads leading to the city. This wasn't random violence, it was a calculated move, designed to paralyze the state and terrorize its citizens, demonstrating that the government could not even protect its own capital. The effects were immediate and catastrophic. Fuel shortages brought Bamako to a standstill. Schools were forced to close. Hospitals struggled to keep generators running. The price of basic goods skyrocketed as transportation networks collapsed. The government was rendered helpless, unable to guarantee energy supplies for its own people, let alone for the foreign embassies that began evacuating their staff. This is the new face of siege warfare in the 21st century. It doesn't require massive armies or medieval walls. It just requires control over the arteries of modern life, the highways that carry fuel, food, and medicine. It is a slow, silent strangulation. This chokehold strategy is being replicated across the region. In Burkina Faso and Niger, insurgents regularly blockade towns and villages, cutting them off from markets and humanitarian aid. They destroy wells, loot granaries, and prevent farmers from reaching their fields. This creates localized famines and forces entire communities to either submit to the militants' rule or flee. These actions generate a constant stream of internally displaced people and refugees, putting immense pressure on neighboring countries and creating a rolling humanitarian disaster. The silent suffering of these populations rarely makes headlines, but it is a direct consequence of this hidden war for control. The economic fallout extends far beyond the blockaded cities. The Sahel is a critical region for global food security, particularly for West African coastal states that depend on its livestock and agricultural products. As insurgents disrupt these traditional trade routes, food prices spike in markets hundreds of miles away in cities like Accra and Lagos. This instability threatens to unravel the economic fabric of the entire West African region. A hidden war in the arid interior directly impacts the price of a meal on a family's table in a bustling coastal metropolis. A stark reminder that in our interconnected world, no conflict is truly local. What begins in the remote Sahel does not stay in the Sahel. The insurgency is metastasizing, spreading south and west, from Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger towards Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Benin, and Nigeria. This expanding arc of fire represents one of the most significant, yet underreported, security threats on the continent. Having consolidated their power in the interior, jihadist groups are now pushing into the northern regions of Benin, Togo, Côte d'Ivoire, and Ghana. They are exploiting long-standing ethnic grievances, disputes between farmers and herders, and the absence of state services to gain a foothold and recruit new followers from marginalized communities. This southward expansion is methodical and patient. The militants don't announce their arrival with grand declarations. Instead, they operate in the shadows, establishing sleeper cells, intimidating local leaders, and launching sporadic attacks on park rangers and border patrols to test state responses. They are creating new front lines in national parks and protected forests that straddle these borders, turning wildlife reserves into logistical bases and training grounds. This creeping infiltration is designed to destabilize these coastal states from within, slowly eroding their authority in their northern peripheries, before launching more overt campaigns of violence. The first signs of this deadly spillover are already clear. In late 2025, JNIM claimed its first-ever attack inside Nigeria, killing a soldier, in an area not far from where the Boko Haram splinter group Ansaru operates. This move signals a dangerous potential for collaboration between the Sahelian jihadists and Nigeria's own entrenched insurgent groups, which could merge two of Africa's deadliest conflicts into one super-insurgency. A successful al-Qaeda takeover in a country like Mali would not be the end of the story. It would be the beginning, creating the first-ever jihadist nation-state that could serve as a launchpad for transnational terror on an unprecedented scale. The global implications of this expansion are immense. The coastal states of West Africa are key economic partners for the rest of the world, with major ports, growing industries, and significant oil production. The destabilization of this region would disrupt global trade, trigger new waves of migration toward Europe, and create a security nightmare for international shipping in the Gulf of Guinea, an area already plagued by piracy. The world's attention may be focused elsewhere, but the flames of the Sahel are spreading, and the firebreak is getting thinner every day. The hidden war for West Africa is on the verge of becoming a very visible global crisis. In the heart of Africa, nestled in the Great Lakes' mineral-rich lands, lies a conflict that has bled for decades, far from the sustained gaze of the world. This is Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a land of staggering natural wealth and unimaginable human suffering. For years, it's been one of the world's most complex, deadliest hidden wars. It is a conflict fought over land, ethnicity, and resources. The players are numerous: a weak national army, over 100 armed militias, and neighboring states using ruthless proxies. The result: A state of perpetual violence, millions killed, countless displaced, a silent holocaust the world has largely forgotten. The latest chapter, the resurgence of M23. In January 2025, in a swift, brutal offensive, M23 seized Goma, the strategic capital of North Kivu, a bustling hub of over 1 million people. The fall of Goma was more than a military defeat. It was a profound psychological blow. It showed the state's inability to protect sovereign territory. The advance did not stop. Rebels pushed onward, capturing key cities, including Bukavu in South Kivu, cementing control over a vast swathe of the country. The human cost has been immense. Thousands killed, hundreds of thousands forced to flee into sprawling makeshift camps, where cholera and starvation run rampant. For those who remain, life has ground to a halt. 1 year after Goma's capture, banks remained shuttered, the formal economy collapsed, replaced by a war economy run by rebels. This is not just rebellion, it is de facto annexation of territory, a violent redrawing of the map in plain sight, shrouded in international indifference. The eastern DRC holds vast deposits of coltan, cobalt, and other minerals. These fuel production of smartphones, electric cars, and modern electronics. Control of these resources fuels the conflict. The war is not a distant tribal squabble. It is tied to the devices in our pockets and the technologies that power our lives. The violence is a dark subsidy for our modern world, a hidden cost paid in blood by the people of the Congo, whose wealth is plundered, whose suffering goes unrecorded, and whose pleas for help go unanswered. The M23 rebellion is not a purely internal Congolese affair. It is a textbook case of a modern proxy war, a conflict fought by remote control. While the M23 fighters are Congolese, evidence from UN experts and independent observers points to a decisive neighboring power, Rwanda. According to these reports, the Rwandan government provides M23 with sophisticated weaponry, intelligence, logistical support, and direct troop reinforcements. This sponsorship turns a local insurgency into a highly effective, well-equipped fighting force, capable of defeating a national army far larger than itself. It is a shadow invasion without a formal declaration of war. Through these surrogate forces, President Paul Kagame has, for all practical purposes, annexed North Kivu and South Kivu. Rwanda denies involvement, but plausible deniability lets it avoid full diplomatic and legal consequences. The goals are twofold: to create a buffer zone against hostile militias rooted in the 1994 Rwandan genocide, and to control the lucrative cross-border trade in smuggled minerals. That lets Rwanda profit from the DRC's mineral wealth while projecting stability. This model of proxy warfare is profoundly destabilizing. It undermines national sovereignty and sets a dangerous precedent for seizing territory and resources via surrogates. The Congolese government, unable to defeat the proxy army, has few good options. It has turned to its own proxies, including disparate local militias and foreign mercenaries. This fragments the conflict and increases danger to civilians. The region becomes a complex chessboard of armed groups, each backed by different patrons, with the Congolese people as pawns in a deadly game. The international response is muted and ineffective, paralyzed by geopolitical interests. Many Western governments view Rwanda as a key security and development partner, an anchor of stability after genocide. That perception dampens willingness to hold Rwanda accountable. The result, a de facto green light for proxy warfare. The hidden war in the Congo exposes a deep hypocrisy in international relations, where the rules-based order is selectively applied, and millions of lives are sacrificed for strategic convenience. Just across the Ubangi River from the DRC lies another nation caught in the throes of a forgotten war, the Central African Republic, or CAR. For years, this landlocked country has been trapped in a vicious cycle of coups, rebellions, and sectarian violence. The state itself barely exists outside the capital, Bangui. The rest of the country is a patchwork of territories controlled by a dizzying array of armed groups, each with its own agenda and foreign backers. This is not a failed state. It is a hollowed-out one. The government's authority is contested not just by rebels, but by militias it has armed to fight them. This is the paradox of the CAR, a republic of militias. A recent crisis in the southeastern town of Zemio perfectly illustrates this dynamic. Fierce clashes erupted between the Central African Armed Forces, FASA, and the Azande Ani KPIGB militia. The Azande militia had been trained and equipped by the government to act as a local self-defense force against other rebel groups. But integrating militias into state security has backfired spectacularly. These groups often retain their own command structures and loyalties, and they then turn their weapons against the state or rival communities, creating new and unpredictable cycles of violence. The humanitarian consequences are devastating. Fighting in Zemio forced massive numbers of civilians to flee with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Nearly 2,000 people were left without shelter, cramming into overburdened hospitals and churches. They face extremely precarious conditions, with critical shortages of food, clean water, and medicine. This is a recurring pattern across the CAR. Every minor skirmish triggers a new wave of displacement, overwhelming the meager resources of aid organizations. The ICRC and other humanitarian bodies struggle to operate, their staff at constant risk and access routinely blocked. This chaos is further inflamed by foreign actors. The country has become a playground for geopolitical competition. Russian mercenaries from the Wagner Group have a deep presence, providing security for the president and training the army, in exchange for lucrative mining concessions for diamonds and gold. Their brutal methods have been widely documented, adding another layer of human rights abuses. Various regional powers back their preferred militias, turning the CAR into a proxy battleground. The state's attempt to co-opt militias has made it a pawn, ensuring its own unraveling. The political situation in the Central African Republic is as fragile as its security. The national elections held in December 2023 were marred by widespread tension and credible allegations of fraud. In a country where democratic institutions are weak and trust is non-existent, a contested election is not just a political crisis, it is a trigger for war. The opposition's contestation raised fears of violent repression, using its Russian-backed army and allied militias to crush dissent. This creates a dangerous feedback loop. Political instability fuels violence, and violence makes any political solution impossible. The state is not just fighting rebels, it is at war with itself. This political decay has dire consequences for the population. With the government's attention and resources focused on its own survival in the capital, the rest of the country is left to fend for itself. Basic services have completely collapsed in many areas: healthcare, education, and law enforcement. In this power vacuum, armed groups become the de facto authorities. They levy their own taxes. They enforce their own brutal justice. They control all economic activity, from local markets to artisanal mines. For ordinary people, survival means navigating a complex web of allegiances, paying off multiple armed groups, and living under the constant threat of violence. The spillover from the CAR's instability poses a significant threat to the entire Central African region, including the DRC, Sudan, South Sudan, and Chad. Weapons, fighters, and refugees flow freely across frontiers, exporting chaos to its neighbors. The conflicts in these countries are deeply interconnected. A flare-up in one can easily ignite a crisis in another. The unraveling of the CAR risks creating a black hole of lawlessness in the heart of the continent, a vast ungoverned space that could be exploited by transnational criminal networks and terrorist organizations seeking a new sanctuary far from the world's attention. The tragedy of the CAR, much like that of the Eastern DRC, is that its immense potential is being squandered. This is a country rich in diamonds, gold, uranium, and timber. Yet its people are among the poorest on Earth. The hidden war, fueled by internal power struggles and external meddling, ensures that this wealth is a curse, not a blessing. It is siphoned off by warlords, corrupt officials, and foreign partners, perpetuating a conflict that keeps the population impoverished and the country broken. The world's silence allows this plunder to continue, guaranteeing that the heart of Africa will keep on bleeding. While global headlines remain fixated on a few select crises, one of the most catastrophic wars of the 21st century has been raging in near total obscurity. In April 2023, the fragile peace in Sudan shattered. A bitter power struggle between two rival generals, the head of the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the leader of the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, exploded into open warfare. What began as clashes in the capital, Khartoum, quickly engulfed the entire nation, plunging Africa's third-largest country into a vortex of violence. This is not a simple civil war. It is a multi-layered conflict involving Islamist militias, foreign mercenaries, ethnic cleansing, and powerful regional patrons, all competing for control of the state and its vast resources. The conflict pits the Sudanese army, backed by remnants of the old Islamist regime, against the powerful and ambitious RSF. The RSF is no ordinary militia. It is a battle-hardened force that evolved from the infamous Janjaweed militias of the Darfur genocide. It was enriched and empowered through its operations in Yemen and its control over Sudan's lucrative gold mines. The war erupted from a failed transition to democratic rule, a final, violent act in a long drama of political betrayal. The two generals, once allies who jointly seized power in a 2021 coup, turned their guns on each other, with the nation's 45 million people trapped in the crossfire. Despite the scale of the devastation, the war in Sudan has remained a footnote in international news coverage. The world's inattention has been devastating. As the fighting spread from the capital to Darfur and the agricultural heartland of Kordofan, it created one of the worst humanitarian disasters on the planet. Millions have been forced to flee their homes, becoming the largest internal displacement crisis in the world. Millions more are on the brink of famine as fighting disrupts harvests and blocks humanitarian aid. The healthcare system has completely collapsed, and diseases like cholera are spreading unchecked through crowded displacement camps. This is a five-alarm fire, a complete societal collapse, yet it barely registers on the global conscience. The reasons for this global silence are disturbingly familiar. The conflict lacks the clear geopolitical narrative that captures Western media attention. There is no simple good versus evil story, but rather a complex power struggle between two deeply flawed military factions. Furthermore, access for journalists and aid workers is severely restricted, making it incredibly difficult to document the full scale of the atrocities being committed. This information blackout allows the belligerents to wage their war with impunity, far from the scrutiny of international law. The world has looked away, and in the shadows of that neglect, Sudan is being systematically destroyed. At the heart of this devastating conflict lies a single, glittering commodity: gold. The Rapid Support Forces, led by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, Hemedti, is not just a paramilitary group. It's a vast economic empire built on Sudan's gold mines. For years before the war, the RSF systematically took control of the country's most lucrative artisanal gold sites in Darfur and Kordofan. That control gave them an independent, virtually limitless source of revenue. It allowed them to transform from a state-sponsored militia into a private army, richer and more powerful than the state. Gold fueled their rise. And now, gold fuels their war. This river of gold built what is effectively a golden army. The wealth extracted is smuggled out of the country, primarily to the United Arab Emirates, where it's sold on the international market. The profits are used to purchase sophisticated weaponry, like anti-aircraft missiles and weaponized drones, and to pay the salaries of their fighters. Crucially, it also allows them to recruit tens of thousands of foreign mercenaries from the Sahel and other impoverished regions. These soldiers have no allegiance to Sudan, only to their paycheck. That financial independence makes the RSF incredibly resilient and hard to defeat. The involvement of external patrons is a critical dimension of this gold-fueled war. The United Arab Emirates has been identified as the RSF's primary financial and logistical backer, providing a market for smuggled gold and a channel for weapons procurement. This support is not just about money, it's about shaping Sudan's future. By backing the RSF, The UAE bets on a client who can secure its economic interests and project influence in the Horn of Africa and the Red Sea corridor. On the other side, the Sudanese army receives support from Egypt and, allegedly, from Iran, turning Sudan into an arena for a regional proxy war. This war for resources has created a self-perpetuating cycle of violence. The more territory the RSF captures, the more gold mines and economic assets it controls. The more wealth it accumulates, the more weapons and fighters it can acquire, allowing it to capture even more territory. Civilians are the primary victims of this predatory war economy. They are displaced from their land so mines can be exploited. They are subjected to extortion and forced labor. Their communities are destroyed in the fight for control over resources. Sudan's natural wealth, which should be the foundation of its prosperity, has become the engine of its destruction. As the war spread from Khartoum to the vast western region of Darfur, it took on a terrifying new dimension. The conflict reawakened the ghosts of the genocide of the early 2000s. A horror that the world had pledged would never happen again. The RSF, the direct descendant of the Janjaweed militia, unleashed a new wave of systematic, ethnically targeted violence. The primary targets were the non-Arab Masalit and other African ethnic groups. The violence was not a byproduct of the war. It was a central objective. It was a brutal campaign of ethnic cleansing, aimed at permanently altering the demographic landscape of Darfur. Gruesome footage and eyewitness accounts smuggled out of the region painted a chilling picture. In cities like El Geneina and after the capture of El Fasher, RSF fighters and their allied Arab militias went on killing sprees, hunting down and executing men, women, and children. They systematically targeted community leaders, lawyers, and activists. Entire neighborhoods were burned to the ground, and hundreds of thousands were forced to flee for their lives, many killed as they tried to escape across the border into Chad. The parallels to the genocide 2 decades earlier were undeniable and horrifying. This campaign of ethnic cleansing is happening with almost total impunity. The collapse of the state and the focus of the war on other fronts have created a lawless environment where mass atrocities can be committed without consequence. The international mechanisms designed to prevent genocide have failed completely. The UN Security Council has been paralyzed by divisions, and the world's major powers have been unwilling to exert the necessary pressure to stop the killing. The promises of never again made after the first Darfur genocide now ring hollow, a testament to the world's selective memory and political inaction. The return of genocide in Darfur is the most tragic outcome of the world's decision to forget Sudan. It shows how hidden wars, when left to fester, can mutate into the most extreme forms of human cruelty. The conflict is not just about 2 generals fighting for power. It is about the very survival of entire communities. It is a stark reminder that when the world looks away, the darkest chapters of history have a tendency to repeat themselves. The silence surrounding Sudan is not just a failure of journalism or diplomacy. It is a moral failure of the highest order, one that is being paid for with the lives of the people of Darfur. In Southeast Asia, another hidden war is tearing a nation apart. In February 2021, the Myanmar military, known as the Tatmadaw, staged a coup, overthrowing the democratically elected government, shattering a decade of fragile reforms. This act of aggression did not go unchallenged. Across the country, a powerful and unprecedented resistance movement erupted. What began as peaceful protests was met with brutal force, pushing the population into armed rebellion. Myanmar has since descended into a full-blown civil war, largely fallen out of the global spotlight. This war pits the well-equipped military junta against a vast and diverse coalition of opponents. The resistance is not a single unified army. It is a sprawling archipelago of defiance. In the cities, pro-democracy militias, People's Defense Forces, or PDFs, have formed. Students, activists, and ordinary citizens with little to no military training. In the countryside and border regions, long-standing ethnic armed organizations, EAOs, representing minorities like the Karen, Kachin, and Shan, have been fighting for autonomy for decades. The coup has forged an uneasy but powerful alliance between these two groups. The EAOs provide training and sanctuary for the new PDFs, creating a formidable opposition that now challenges the junta's authority across vast swathes of the country. The result is a fractured map of control. The military junta maintains a firm grip on the central plains and major urban centers like Naypyidaw and Yangon, but its control is often thin and contested. Outside government strongholds, much of the countryside is a patchwork of liberated zones and contested territories. The resistance controls key border crossings, disrupts military supply lines, and engages in constant guerrilla warfare. The Tatmadaw, despite superior firepower, is stretched thin, fighting a multi-front war against a population turned decisively against it, a battle it is struggling to win. This is a war of unimaginable brutality, waged far from the world's eyes. The military has used a scorched earth policy. Airstrikes on villages, burning homes, and mass killings of civilians. Minority groups, including the long-persecuted Rohingya, have suffered horrific abuses. With humanitarian access blocked by the junta, a silent disaster is unfolding. Millions have been internally displaced. Healthcare and education systems have collapsed. Myanmar is not just at war. It is a society being systematically dismantled by its own military, a tragedy unfolding in the shadows of global indifference. The conflict in Myanmar is not a simple binary struggle. It is a complex mosaic of multiple, overlapping wars. The Tatmadaw is not just fighting pro-democracy forces, it is simultaneously battling dozens of ethnic armed groups. This fragmentation makes the war incredibly difficult to resolve. The military finds itself besieged from all sides. Coordinated offensives in the north by the Arakan Army and the Myanmar National Democratic Alliance Army, the MNDAA, and battles along the Thai border by Karen and Karenni forces. It is, a war of 1,000 cuts, bleeding the junta of troops, resources, and morale. Ethnic armed organizations, seasoned by decades of jungle warfare, have proven exceptionally effective. They have seized military bases. They have captured entire towns. They have taken control of vital trade routes to China and Thailand. These victories are strategic blows to the junta's power and finances. By capturing border crossings, resistance groups choke off the military's revenue from trade and customs duties, while they secure their own funding streams. This has created a tipping point. The once invincible Tatmadaw now appears vulnerable and on the defensive. The war has also exposed deep fractures within the military itself. Faced with mounting casualties and low morale, the Tatmadaw has seen a growing number of defections. Soldiers and even entire units have surrendered to resistance forces. To fill its depleted ranks, the junta has resorted to desperate measures. A mandatory conscription law. Young men and even women being forced into military service against their will. This has only fueled more anger and driven thousands of youths to flee the cities and join the resistance. This multi-front war has pushed Myanmar to the brink of becoming a failed state. The junta's effective control is shrinking to an ever smaller island in a sea of resistance. While it can still inflict immense suffering through its air power, it cannot govern the territory it claims to rule. The country is unraveling. Parallel administrations, competing currencies, and separate legal systems operating in different regions. This collapse of central authority threatens to destabilize the region, creating a black hole of instability with far-reaching repercussions. The civil war in Myanmar is not being fought in a vacuum. It has become another arena for geopolitical competition, with international powers quietly backing different factions. The most significant external player is China, which shares a long, porous border with Myanmar. Beijing has complex, often contradictory goals. It seeks stability to protect massive infrastructure investments, like oil and gas pipelines, and a strategic port project to reach the Indian Ocean. It also keeps long-standing ties with powerful ethnic armed groups along the border, giving Beijing leverage over both the junta and the resistance. That creates a delicate balancing act. China provides diplomatic cover for the junta at the United Nations, but it has also allowed the resistance to capture territory and key trade hubs along its border. That signals to the generals in Naypyidaw. Beijing's support is not unconditional. The conflict becomes a proxy struggle for influence. Other regional powers like Thailand and India are deeply concerned. They walk a fine line between engaging the junta and managing flows of refugees and narcotics across their borders. Russia has become one of the junta's main arms suppliers, further internationalizing the conflict. The instability has big implications for the global economy. Myanmar is a key producer of rare earth elements. It is also a major supplier of garments and other consumer goods. The war has severely disrupted these supply chains, causing shortages and uncertainty for international companies. Fighting along the Thai border has repeatedly stalled cross-border trade. Fighting along the Chinese border has done the same. A hidden war in one country can ripple through global commerce and empty store shelves thousands of miles away. The ultimate fear, the collapse and balkanization of Myanmar. That would create a humanitarian catastrophe on an epic scale, sending millions of refugees into ill-equipped neighboring countries. It would also create ungoverned space ripe for exploitation by transnational criminal groups engaged in drug trafficking and human smuggling. For ASEAN, the unraveling of a member state would be a diplomatic and security nightmare. The hidden war in Myanmar is a ticking time bomb, threatening 54 million people and the stability of the entire Indo-Pacific region. From the arid plains of the Sahel to the dense jungles of Myanmar, a clear and disturbing pattern emerges from these hidden wars. They are the conflicts that thrive in the shadows of our inattention, festering in the darkness cast by global headlines. Each war is unique in its origins, yet they share a common DNA. They are wars fought by proxy, where regional and global powers use surrogate forces to wage battles by remote control, pursuing their own strategic interests under a veneer of plausible deniability. Remote control warfare is visible in the DRC with Rwandan-backed rebels and in Sudan with UAE-funded paramilitaries. It lets powerful nations redraw maps and seize resources with minimal political fallout, all at the expense of civilian lives. The second common thread is the predatory struggle for resources. These are violent corporate takeovers more than ideological wars. Control over gold in Sudan, coltan in the Congo, and strategic trade routes in Myanmar. Natural wealth, meant to be a blessing, is twisted into a curse, fueling a self-perpetuating cycle of violence. Warlords and foreign patrons plunder resources to buy weapons, mercenaries, and supplies, keeping wars alive and profits flowing. This violent extraction economy is a dark subsidy for the global market, a hidden cost in the products we consume every day, from our smartphones to our jewelry. Another defining feature is deliberate information blackouts. The perpetrators know obscurity is their greatest weapon. Restricting access for journalists, blocking humanitarian aid, and orchestrating internet shutdowns lets them commit mass atrocities with impunity. That manufactured silence conceals ethnic cleansing in Darfur, sieges in Mali, and scorched earth campaigns in Myanmar. The result is silent humanitarian disasters. Millions suffer and die uncounted, their stories unheard, their pleas unanswered. This is not a failure of media. It's a calculated strategy, exploiting the world's limited attention. Finally, no war is truly local in our interconnected world. The ripple effects are global and unavoidable. A blockade of a Malian city drives up food prices in coastal West Africa. The collapse of order in the Central African Republic exports instability across Central Africa. The civil war in Myanmar shatters global supply chains. Waves of refugees spill across borders, creating political tensions thousands of miles away. These hidden wars are not isolated events. They are tremors along the fault lines of our global system, each one a warning of a much larger earthquake to come. Ignoring these conflicts is not a passive act. It is an active choice with severe consequences. The immediate risk is escalation. A hidden war, left to fester, can easily boil over into a full-blown regional catastrophe. The jihadist expansion from the Sahel southward toward the Gulf of Guinea is a clear and present danger, threatening to destabilize key West African economies. The proxy war in the DRC could ignite a direct confrontation between regional states, drawing in the entire Great Lakes region. The world's silence acts as an accelerant, signaling to belligerents that there are no red lines and no price to pay for aggression, making wider wars more, not less, likely. For those of us watching from afar, the consequences are no longer abstract. They are arriving at our doorsteps. The disruption of supply chains for critical minerals from the DRC and Myanmar will lead to higher prices and shortages of everything from electric cars to consumer electronics. The weaponization of food and fuel in the Sahel directly impacts global commodity prices and food security. The mass displacement of people from Sudan and elsewhere fuels migration crises that dominate political debates in Europe and North America. The price of our silence is measured in economic volatility, social tension, and a less secure world for everyone. So, what can be done? The first step is to break the silence. The public and policymakers must demand more consistent and in-depth coverage of these forgotten regions, moving beyond the 24-hour news cycle. We must support the work of local journalists and human rights organizations who risk their lives to document these atrocities. Secondly, there must be a concerted diplomatic push to hold the sponsors of proxy warfare accountable. This means imposing targeted sanctions, not on entire populations, but on the individuals, corporations, and governments who arm and fund these militias. Plausible deniability must no longer be an acceptable excuse for inaction. Ultimately, we must recognize that stability is indivisible. A world where states can be dismantled by remote control and genocide can unfold in the shadows is a world that is fundamentally unsafe for all. The international community must reinvest in multilateral diplomacy, peacekeeping, and humanitarian aid, applying the rules of the international order consistently, not just when it is convenient. Acknowledging these hidden wars is the first step toward resolving them. For in the dark corners where these conflicts rage, the future of global security is being decided, whether we choose to watch or not. The price of silence is one we can no longer afford to pay.